A former Biden White House official has raised concerns about Donald Trump's economic credibility following recent warnings from the Federal Reserve Chair about potential risks to the U.S. economy. The official pointed to Trump's past economic policies and statements, suggesting they may not align with the current economic challenges. The remarks come amid growing public debate over how each presidential candidate plans to address inflation and economic growth.
Phil, let's show everybody the numbers there. The Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell spoke today and seemed to precipitate what we're seeing on the street. Explain.
Yeah, I think markets are reacting, one, to reality on some level, which is that nothing's really changed over the course of the two rather calm market days that we've seen. There is still the largest tariffs in more than a century. There's still an ongoing trade war with China, and everybody's waiting for some development on negotiations on bilateral deals or the potential for them. What changed was mostly the Fed chair coming out and making very clear this point. Take a listen.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects, which will include higher tariffs.
Now, Casey, on top of that, there were two additional points Powell made building off of what you just heard that I think are extremely critical to pay attention to right now. One, the expectations are that situation he was describing on economic conditions and inflation is a situation that he said expected to play out over the balance of the year. So it's going to be longer term. It's not going to be something that turns around immediately. The second is he raised the prospect of these Fed's, quote, dual mandate, their statutory requirements as the Fed, at some point coming into tension with one another. So the Fed has two roles, right? You keep prices stable, you deal with inflation, and you also keep employment low, full employment. When those two things run into one another, what he's saying, to translate, is the potential for stagflation, something we haven't seen in a real tangible way since the 1970s. It is the worst nightmare for a Fed chair because what they can do with rates, what they can do with QE, handles one of those issues. When they're running into one another, which isn't supposed to happen, they're out of tools. You're kind of like a soccer goalie that has to pick on a penalty kick which way you're going to dive and just hope you pick the right direction. That is a pretty stark warning, and I think that, more than anything else, is what markets are paying attention to.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, the Fed chairman is so measured in the way that he speaks. It makes the weight of a statement like this all that much heavier. Obviously, we have other public figures who are not so restrained and careful with the words that they choose. He does not share that characteristic. Phil Mattingly, always grateful to have you start the show. Thanks very much. All right, our panel is here. CNN legal analyst Elliot Williams, CNN political director and our Washington bureau chief David Chalian, CNN political commentator, former Biden White House communications director Kate Bedingfield is here, and CNN senior political commentator Scott Jennings back again. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. David Chalian, let me start with you, big picture on this economic situation. Obviously, there are a number of battles that the White House seems eager to fight with Democrats. We're going to get to some of that later on in the show. But what is going on in the economy represents a really fundamental risk for President Trump, for Republicans. And there has been no small amount of chatter of them saying, well, we'll do this with the tariffs. It'll cause the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates to the floor. Businesses will explode and the economy will take off. The Fed chair today seems to be saying, yeah, no, sorry.
I mean, to hear the Fed chairman just say so clearly that this policy is likely to lead to higher inflation and slower growth, it's like at the core, the two things that Donald Trump promised Americans on the campaign trail last year would be prices would come down and there would be robust economic growth. And the Fed chair today is in direct contradiction with that if he turns out right. I mean, that's his prediction of what these policies will be. If that is right, I think that poses a political problem, as you note, yes, for Donald Trump, but really far more immediate in the 26 midterms is for his party up on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, well, and it also presents a problem for a lot of Americans, Scott Jennings. I mean, again, the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, picks his words very carefully. He also has, there has been no small amount of tension between him and President Trump. I would just point to this Wall Street Journal headline from November 7th, 2024. You may recall that's about the time that Donald Trump won the election, when Powell says that he won't step down if he's asked to by Trump. I don't imagine that the president is very happy about what the Fed chairman had to say today. Do you see a brewing standoff?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect tickets to the Easter egg roll if I were Chairman Powell right now. Look, of course, and I'm sure President Trump's going to react negatively to this statement today because he sees it much differently. He sees this as a long-term transformation of the economy. He sees a number of investment announcements that have happened that disprove all the apocalyptic doom and gloom, and he has already said he's willing to accept some short-term pain. And he's asked the American people, or at least his supporters, to accept that as we transform the economy to the benefit of the working class. However, the problem is and will be the trajectory of the economy in the minds of voters come next summer, late summer, and the fall. I think they actually will accept a continued amount of turbulence if they think the trajectory is good. That's really the measurement of how people feel. I don't think all the problems have to be fixed because they know there were myriad problems under the previous administration. But if they think they're on the right track, they'll give them some more leash. If they think they're on the wrong track, that's when you start to run into problems with the voters.
That may be, but I think the challenge Trump's going to have here, I mean, there's so few things that a president truly has control over in office. You make all these promises on the campaign trail, you come into office, and then you have to deal with the world as it is. The thing that is so interesting about this is that the chaotic implementation of these tariffs is a huge piece of what's driving the uncertainty in the market and the challenges here. And so it may be true traditionally that if people feel like the economy is moving in the right direction, they're willing to give the president leeway. But Trump has stood up and thrown his arms around this and said, this is my problem. I created it because in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, things are going to be better for you. I think it's going to be really tough in the fall of 2026 to ask voters to say, well, just hold your nose and just wait, and it's going to get better.
Moreover, it's to pick up on both David's and your points, Kate, the certainty with which Donald Trump came in saying, look, in effect, I alone can fix it, to echo the point that he made several years ago, that what I will implement will ultimately fix the economy and make things better for all Americans. Yes, he has some runway, but that runway is getting much, much shorter.
I do think some of the chaos may seem reduced if over the next few weeks they do roll out a series of announcements with trade deals with individual countries. I mean, they're obviously in deal-making mode. This is what he was put on this earth to do, make deals. Countries are coming to the table. So if they start to say, here's our deal with Japan, here's our deal with Vietnam, here's our deal with all these countries, and we're actually building a coalition to isolate China, I actually think that could make it seem like the chaos is being reduced, and people start to see the end game here, which is a stronger America and a weaker China on the internet.
Fair enough.
That would also require him, but that would require him to stick to whatever deal he negotiates. I mean, part of the challenge is, you see the Commerce Secretary or the Treasury Secretary come out and say, well, actually, no, there's going to be an exception on chips, and there's going to be an exception on phones, and then Trump says, well, I don't really like the word exception. So, I think Trump has a credibility challenge here. It may be that he's able to successfully negotiate all these trade deals. I'm not sure the market is going to believe him, even when he comes out and says these are the terms, because he himself hasn't stuck to his previously set agenda here.
And the bigger point is that not all trade deals are created equal. And yes, we can strike trade deals with Sri Lanka and Vietnam, but none of these countries have the power, to harm the American economy that China does, and without a consideration of China. Yeah.
And just to your point about Powell, you showed that Wall Street Journal headline, I think it was, from the election time. I think it was just yesterday or the day before, Treasury Secretary Bessent in Argentina talked about starting to interview or come up with a list of people thinking of new candidates because when Powell's term ends next year, Trump is going to be in position to. And the fact that it was like out there yesterday from the Treasury Secretary already seeding the ground of trying to look at the post-Powell era. To Scott's point, I would be very surprised if Donald Trump did not react negatively to what the Fed chairman said today.
Well, and Scott, can you just be realistic with me? I understand you're presenting how the administration is looking at this. We're going to talk for a second about deportations. We're going to talk later in the show about transgender athletes, right? There are all these fights that the administration is generating, is picking in many ways. Realistically, is the economy the riskiest ground for the president right now? Is this the biggest question mark for him on a very long list of very contentious issues?
Of course, the economy is always the riskiest ground for any president because you tend to rise and fall based on how people think you did with it. So when you make sweeping changes to the way our economy works, the way it's going to work around the world, there is a lot of risk in that, but there could also be a lot of reward in it if people see the end game, which is we isolated China, the working class feels like better jobs are coming back to decimated communities. So there's a lot of reward here, but it could take some time to get there. I will say on the other fights, I think they're on the right side of virtually every fight they're picking. I mean, you mentioned some of the cultural fights they're picking. Immigration's his best issue right now. These are not inconsequential matters. I mean, on a lot of these things, he's on the 80, the Dems
Over the
are on
past
20.
decade, China has steadily expanded its regional footprint through growing economic influence. As former President Trump's tariffs threaten Southeast Asian economies that heavily depend on access to the U.S. market, Beijing is presenting itself as a stable and reliable economic partner.